Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to be doing a One Piece deck profile. This, of course, is the Red-Green Law deck. So really interesting deck. A lot of fun to play and very competitive too. The leader introduces like a really unique mechanic. It's kind of gimmicky, and initially I thought it would suck, but after you play the deck and actually try it out, it's a lot of fun to master, and you can pull off some really sick combos with this. So before I get into the video, I'm just going to give a little overview of this leader and just kind of the overall playstyle of this deck. And then after that, we'll go into the in-depth explanations on all the card choices and the combos you can pull off with these cards and why I chose some of these ratios. And then finally, we'll just recap with the deck list. So if at any point you want to skip forward in the video, there's going to be timestamps in the descriptions down below. All right, without any further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so first off, we're just going to go over the Leader Law's effects and some of the key mechanics of this deck. Again, Leader Law has a really quirky and gimmicky sort of effect. You know, when I read this card before Romance Dawn released, I thought it was going to be way too niche. I had no intention of playing this guy. The only reason I even bothered because I pulled him, and I'm so glad I did because this deck is just really amazing. So if you don't know Red-Green Law's effect as yet, here it is. So activate main once per turn. You can rest 2 Dawn cards, and if you have 5 characters, return 1 of them to your hand, and then play 1 character with a cost of 5 or less from your hand. That's a different color than the returned character. So again, you can just see how restrictive that is. I mean, we've basically got 3 things we're working with here. We have to have a full board. You can only he's only live if you've got 5 characters on board. On top of that, whatever you bounce back, you have to play something of a different color. And then the third thing is, you know, whatever you play has to be 5 or less. But within that, if you build your deck around this guy, it can actually be pretty amazing. So obviously we're going to be running a lot of low-cost units so that we can just set up board really quickly. And then we're going to be trying to capitalize on that bouncing ability. So some of the things you can do with that bounce effect is essentially you can recycle on-play effects, right? Because if you have a character that has an on-play effect, you're usually only going to get that once. If you bounce it back to hand with this guy, you can just play that card again and get another search or another, you know, KO an opponent's character, which is really amazing. On top of that, we also have the ability to bounce rested cards back to our hands, right? So if we attack and we don't want our unit to get destroyed on the opponent's turn, we can just send that card back to our hand. And then lastly, I mean, just the obvious effect here is that we can play 5 cost units for 2 cost instead, which is really nuts. So this guy is a really great card. This over here is kind of a miniature version of him. So this Law is the character version. He also has an on-play effect to bounce something back to your hand, and then you can play something of 3 or less from your hand. This one does not have any color restrictions, does not have any restriction on you having a full board or anything like that. So in some ways, he's actually better than the leader. And with the combination of these two, you can just constantly be swapping things off of your board, back to your hand, back onto your board, and just doing all sorts of crazy combos with this deck. All right, guys, so getting straight into the deck profile. Like I said, the first restriction that we need to work around is the fact that Leader Law requires you, in order to use this effect, you've got to bounce back something to your hand and play something of a different color. So the first thing that we really want to make sure about in this deck profile is that we have an even distribution of reds and greens. If your deck is too lopsided, you're going to find yourself breaking all the time and not being able to capitalize on this guy's effect. So we want a lot of low cost so that we can fill up board real quick so his effect is live, and then we want a lot of reds and greens evenly distributed in our deck so that we can make sure, again, that our hand supports his ability. So first off, real straightforward, real simple. We've got 4 Bege and 4 Chopper. Our red and our green 1-cost blockers, really nice, especially in a deck where you've only got 4 life. You do want to make sure that you're able to protect yourself, especially mid to late game. So the 4 blockers on both colors are really nice. And then just for some extra support here, this is honestly a flex spot. You can swap this out if you think that it's not helping you that much, but I'm running 2 of the 2-cost Killer. He's also a blocker, so we've just got an even 10 in terms of the low-cost blockers. Killer does have an extra effect when he's got a Dawn equipped to him. I'm honestly not a fan of blockers that require you to have a Dawn on them to use their effect, but, you know, occasionally you can capitalize on that because, again, we are going to have a full board, and Killer, if you've got full board, 1 Dawn on him, and you block, allows you to draw a card. It can come in useful sometimes. But that is it for the blockers. Next up, we have got our searchers. So we have got 4 Nami, and 4 Bonney. These are both really good cards. Obviously, Nami is an on-play effect to search all of your Straw Hats. Jewelry Bonney is not an on-play effect. She requires you to actually suspend a Dawn, so that is like not as synergistic with the leader here. But both are still fantastic cards. Again, Nami searches all your Straw Hats. Bonney searches all of your Supernovas. This is your, your Chopper, your Luffy, your Zoro, even Nico Robin. Bonney here is going to search pretty much anything green in your deck. They're all Supernovas, except for maybe one card that we've got. And the great thing about Zoro and Luffy is that these guys are both Supernovas and Straw Hats, so these are searchable off of either of these cards, which is awesome. So we've got 8 searchers for our game-ending cards, our strong rushers, so that is really excellent. And again, Nami being an on-play effect, you can totally use Leader Law's effect to bounce her back to the hand, and then just play her for one more Dawn and get the search again and again and again. It's really, really amazing. And then Bonney, of course, you have to suspend her in order to use her effect. Usually opponents are going to go and try to kill her the next turn. You could use Law's effect to bounce her back to the hand so that you have her in hand for next turn, or just as a 1000 counter. That is pretty neat. All right, moving on to our last 1-cost unit. We have got 4 copies of Otama. Now, this is kind of a weird one. I honestly think this card is like very mid in just a plain old red deck, but in this deck, you can really capitalize on this card. So Otama, again, has an on-play effect. Give one of your opponent's characters minus 2000 power during this turn. That is just phenomenal in this deck because we're running lots of red event cards and, Nico Robin as well, who can KO characters on your opponent's board who are less than a certain amount of attack. So Otama just puts them within striking range of those cards, which is awesome. And she's a 1-cost, and then you can just, again, bounce her back to hand using your leader over here. And then when she's in hand, she is a 2000 counter, which is phenomenal. So you just want to play her basically minus something by 2000, either swing at it to kill it or use one of your events to kill it. And then you can bounce the Otama back to your hand, and you have her ready to counter some strong hits that your opponent might come swinging in with. All right, now we're going to move on to our on-play KOs. So we are playing 2 copies of Killer and 2 copies of X-Drake. So Killer, on play, KO one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. Honestly, this guy always makes me consider taking him out of the deck, but then he always just comes in clutch enough to warrant his spot at 2. He is also a trigger, which is pretty neat. If he ends up in your life stack, you can always just draw him and play him for free. Even if you don't get the KO effect, just helps to fill up your board, which we always want because of this leader. Then we've got our 5-cost X-Drake, and he is on play. KO one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 4 or less. So just a more expensive, better killer, basically. No trigger, but still a pretty awesome card. And he is 5-cost, meaning you can play him if you have full board. You could bounce a red unit back to hand with Law, and then just play X-Drake for just 2 Dawn and KO an opponent's character that's 4 or less. That's pretty freaking huge. So these 2 are both great includes in the deck. I wouldn't go more than 2 for either of these. And if you wanted to cut one, if you find it's not really working for you, I'd say those are reasonable flex spots as well. Next up, we've got some 3 costs. We have got our 3 Nico Robin and 2 Okiku. So both of these are really good cards. Again, 3 cost is pretty low relatively. So these also just kind of help to fill up the board. Nico Robin, Dawn, when she's got 1 Dawn on her, when attacking, you can KO one of your opponent's characters with 3000 power or less. Once again, we have Otama to put your opponent's characters within striking range of Nico Robin. You can just, put 1 Dawn on her, she becomes 5k. You can swing at life and just KO anything automatically that is under 3000. That is really, really strong. Okiku is kind of a similar effect. So when she has 1 Dawn on her, she's a 3 cost 5000, by the way. And when she's got a Dawn on her, when you attack, you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. That is really cool. So it's just good to have some versatility in this deck. We really want to capitalize on the fact that we've got both red and green. The red characters often scale off of your opponent's character's power, whereas the green characters scale off of your opponent's character's cost. So again, you know, Okiku is resting something that's less than 5 cost. Nico, Robin is killing something that's less than 3,000 power. So it's just good to have both of those kind of methods in your deck to get rid of threats, because you never know what type of deck your opponent is running. Some variety in our ability to deal with them is always nice. All right, next up we have our finishers in this deck. We've got 3 copies of Zoro and 2 copies of Luffy. Honestly, I kind of do want to up this to 3. I think one of the flex spots that I mentioned early in this video, you might want to consider dropping one of those for a 3rd Luffy. But yeah, Zoro and Luffy, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. These guys have rush, so they can attack the turn they're played, and they're pretty damn strong units. Zoro is a 3 cost, 5,000, meaning he can swing at life for very low cost. Luffy is a 5k. We usually want to try to summon him off of Law's ability. We want to have full board, bounce a green card back to hand, play Luffy for just 2, and then you can put 2 Dawn on him and make him unblockable. So that's a really strong play. And yeah, I mean, these guys are again, these are generally how we go for game. We want to finish off with these guys. Some people might call blasphemy for not running 4 of each, but again, these guys are just so searchable. They're supernovas and they're straw hats. In a red-green deck, we already have kind of a problem staying within our 50 card limit because there's just so much variety. We have so many cards to choose from. I like to make cuts where I can, and just because, you know, these guys are, again, just searchable off of our 4 Namis and our 4 Bonnies. We have so many ways to get these guys to hand. I'm never feeling like I'm missing them when I need them. So I think 3 is sufficient, definitely, for Zoro. Luffy, again, I would probably up this to 3 and maybe cut one of the previous cards that you saw. And next up, I am going to throw in 3 of the Character Law. So this guy, again, is just kind of a miniature version of the leader. He is 5 cost. On play, you can bounce a character back to your hand and then play a character with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. So this guy is neat because he can actually bounce a character back to hand and play that same character, unlike the leader, who can't do that because he has a restriction on colors. This law makes no restriction about what color the character has to be that you bounce or that you play, meaning that you can, you know, totally, I don't know, drop a Nami for 1 cost, drop this guy for 5, bounce the Nami back to hand with his effect, and then just play the Nami again. So for 6 Dawn, you got 2 searches and you got a blocker on board. Yeah, did I forget to mention this guy's a blocker? 5 cost, 6k blocker. That is really strong. And with some of the events in this deck, we can keep this guy, you know, just on board, constantly blocking our opponent's hits and just buffing him in order to keep him alive as well. It's really strong because, again, we can just have sort of a perma blocker on board as well as a unit that's strong enough to swing at the opponent's life. Now, next up, I am running 3 of the starter deck law. So this is also a 5 cost. This guy on play allows you to set one of your rested supernovas as active. So again, all of our strong characters that we're swinging for game with, Zoro, Luffy, this law, and I mean, even this guy himself, they're all supernovas. So we can play this guy, unsuspend one of these characters that's on board, and then just swing a second time in 1 turn. Especially since this guy is 5, you can summon him again with, you can play him for just 2 Dawn off of the leader's effect, which is amazing. Just getting another swing, an unblockable swing with this Luffy for just 2 Dawn is amazing. So this is a really, really like auto include for me. I see a lot of people running this at 2 and this guy at 4, but I honestly think 3 and 3 is a better ratio. This guy just really closes games and he's a fantastic card. I think definitely earns a spot at 3, and he also has a counter value, which some of our stronger cards don't. So it's nice to have a heavy cost card that can also just come in handy as a counter if you need him to block a hit. All right, and our very last unit in the deck is our 8 cost kid. So 8 cost kid is pretty neat. He is a little bit costly, honestly, for this deck. Most of our units we want to just run under 5 so that they're playable off of our leader's ability, but I think this guy earns his spot at 1 in the deck. So on your opponent's turn, if this character is rested, your opponent cannot attack anything except for him. despite what his card text says, despite the misprint that Bandai made here, your opponent is not allowed to attack anything but him if he's got a Dawn on him and he's rested on your opponent's turn. So that is really cool, and we can rest him the turn that we play him because he has another effect, activate main once per turn. You can rest this character and play one card with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. That's also great because that synergizes with the rest of our deck. We're playing a lot of low-cost units, and this guy could be playing a Nami from hand to get you a search, or a Killer from hand to KO one of your opponent's characters, and then he rests himself, and again, he just becomes like a perma blocker for your opponent. Again, really useful in a deck where we have just 4 life. Just some extra protection to keep them from swinging at life is always nice. And that is our last character. Now I'm just going to go through the events. Got 2 Punk Gibson, 3 Gum Gum Red Hawk, and 2 Gum Gum Jet Pistol. So these Red Hawk and Punk Gibson, basically just the same card. One is for green and one is for red. Punk Gibson is, give your character or leader 4,000 when your opponent swings at you, and then you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. That's pretty darn good. And then the trigger is if you draw this from your life stack, you can rest one of your opponent's characters. No stipulation on what their cost is or anything like that. So that is just a really amazing effect. You can just, a possible game-ending turn on your opponent's side, you can just rest whatever they were planning on swinging with, and then they're screwed. They are not able to KO you that turn. Then we have Red Hawk, also really good. Again, plus 4,000 power during any battle when your opponent swings at you. And then you can KO one of your opponent's characters with 4,000 power or less. That is really, really powerful. Get rid of a blocker, get rid of anything problematic, honestly, that's under 4,000. And that is just a really good effect. And then the trigger, more or less the same as Punk Gibson's. When you draw this from your life stack, you can give your opponent's leader or one of their characters minus 10,000. So you can just, again, remove a character from the equation, just stop them from swinging at you that turn, which is fantastic. Last, we've got Gum Gum Jet Pistol. So the main effect, if we decide to play this, it is a little costly. I find myself not wanting to play this a lot just because we're trying to save our Dawn for all of our units. But 4 cost and KO one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 or less. That is a pretty brutal ability. And especially with Otama in our deck, we can put some of their really strong characters within striking range of Jet Pistol. Just play Otama for 1 and then spend an extra 4 for the Jet Pistol and kill something that potentially had 8,000 power. That's a really amazing effect. Then the trigger, just activate this card's main effect. One of the most busted triggers in the game. Definitely earns its spot in the deck. All right, so now we just have the deck list laid out in case you wanted to just see all the cards again. Just recapping, we've got 4 Chopper, 4 Bege, and 2 Killer as our blockers. We've got 4 Nami and 4 Bonney as our searchers, 4 Otama just for some nice utility. We've got Killer and an X-Drake to KO opponent's rested characters. Okiku and Robin have great on-attacking effects. We've got Zoro, 3 Zoro, 2 Luffy as our rushers to close out games. Law to play a little more with that whole bounce back to hand effect. Another Law to just attack more. And 8 Don Kid, he's really good just to protect your life towards the end of the game if you're running low on life. Then we've got our events, Red Hawk, Jet Pistol, and Punk Gibson at 3, 2, and 2 copies. This just, again, helps with survivability and also just knocks out some of your opponent's characters for free, which is really nice. And that is the deck, guys. All right, I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said, this deck was a real pleasant surprise for me. It has far and away become my favorite deck to play. When you first try it out, you'll probably be blundering a lot, but as you stick with it, you'll realize that it's just really enjoyable and fun to play. It's just got such a high skill ceiling and requires so much careful planning of your next move. Just the process of playing this deck over and over and just getting better at piloting it is so rewarding. It's just such a different and interesting deck, and it's really versatile and able to handle a lot of threats. I think this is one of the best decks I've played in terms of not having like a hard counter. This deck performs really well against all colors in my experience. So yeah, I really hope you guys have fun playing it. And if you enjoyed this deck profile, please do like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help our channel. And yeah, let us know down below what kind of content you want to see in the future. And with that, peace.